I work in healthcare. It's the kind of job that doesn't just exhaust your body, it drains your soul. My only way to reset was the ocean. On my days off, I'd drive out to the coast late at night just to listen to the waves and stare at the stars. It was my therapy. Until a cold November night changed everything. It was around 1 a.m. when I finally left the clinic. A brutal wind was whipping dead leaves across the parking lot, and the air had that sharp, frozen bite of late autumn. My co-worker warned me to avoid the main highway because of the crosswinds, so I took the old coastal road. It was a longer route, snaking through thick forests and along jagged cliffs, but it was usually peaceful. About 10 minutes in, I passed a tiny flickering gas station. In the gravel lot sat an old idling truck. I could just make out a silhouette behind the wheel. At the time, I felt a strange sense of comfort. Just another soul awake in the middle of the night. But as the miles went by, my eyes grew heavy. I decided to pull over at a small, isolated beach I loved. The plan was simple. 5 minutes of cold sea air and a quick smoke to wake myself up for the final stretch home. I parked at the far end of the lot, facing the crashing waves. It was pitch black, and the storm made the ocean sound like a living thing, growling in the darkness. Suddenly, a pair of headlights swept across my dashboard. A vehicle had pulled into the lot. It parked about 100 yards away and cut its lights. Silence returned, but the peace was gone. A knot tightened in my stomach. It wasn't uncommon for people to come here late, but something felt deliberate. I tried to laugh it off. Too many horror podcasts, I whispered to myself. I finished my cigarette and put my foot on the brake to shift into gear. The red glow of my brake lights illuminated the area behind my car for a split second. In the reflection of the side mirror, I thought I saw a blur of movement. I tapped the brakes again. My heart didn't just race, it stopped. There, bathed in the eerie red light, was a man. He was crouched low, pressed right against the side of my car, mere inches from my door. He was inching forward, his hand reaching for my handle. Pure, raw survival instinct took over. I slammed the car into reverse, forcing him to dive out of the way, then floored it toward the exit. As my headlights swung around, they caught him. The man from the truck at the gas station, sprinting back to his vehicle. The next 20 minutes were a blur of terror. I was flying down that winding road, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror. And then, there they were. 2 headlights, closing the gap. He was hunting me. I knew the road, and that was my only advantage. I saw a narrow, hidden gravel path ahead. I took the turn at a dangerous speed, gunned it deep into the trees, and killed my lights. I sat there in the suffocating darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I prayed. I prayed he would pass. I prayed the forest would hide me. 10 minutes passed. 20. Nothing but the sound of the wind through the pines. I eventually made it home, but I never went back to that beach. I realized that night that while I was looking at the ocean, someone else was looking at me. And they weren't there for the view. It was May 2020. The world had just shut down, and for a high school senior in South Jersey, there wasn't much to do but kill time. My friend lived in one of those quiet, isolated neighborhoods. Just 2 streets forming a loop, backed by miles of dense, untouched forest. One night, I found an old skateboard in their garage and decided to learn how to ride. We went out to the edge of the woodline, where the road dipped into a small hill. It was supposed to be a harmless way to spend the evening, but within minutes, I hit a pebble, wiped out, and fractured my wrist. The next night, despite the pain and the cast, I couldn't stop thinking about a trail I'd noticed between two houses near the hill. I asked my friend about it. They told me they walked it all the time. Being bored and reckless, we grabbed two small flashlights and headed in. We wanted to explore, so we made a choice that would haunt us. We went off trail, pushing deeper into the blackness of the Jersey woods. 5 minutes in, the silence broke. Crunch. Something heavy was stepping on dried leaves directly in front of us. We froze, swinging our lights toward the sound. Nothing. We told ourselves it was just a deer and changed direction. 5 minutes later, it happened again. Crunch. Always right in front of us. Then, the rain started. A light drizzle at first, making the woods feel even more claustrophobic. A heavy, sinking feeling hit my gut. I whispered that we needed to get out, right now. But we were lost. By the time we finally stumbled back onto the original path, the rain was coming down hard. And that's when the sound changed. The crunching wasn't in front of us anymore. It was behind us. Multiple sets of feet moving fast. I turned my head and my heart nearly stopped. Through the trees and the downpour, I saw 4 flashlights. They weren't swaying like someone walking. They were bobbing violently. They were sprinting right at us. We took off. I was running for my life with a fractured wrist, balancing as best I could while the adrenaline screamed in my ears. We reached the end of the trail near a giant fence, but I knew I couldn't climb it with one hand. We had no choice but to double back toward the road. We burst out onto the asphalt. I made it first and turned around to yell at my friend to hurry up. Behind them, out of the darkness of the trail, those 4 lights appeared again, silently closing the gap. We didn't stop until we reached the house and bolted every lock. From the corner of the street, under the dim glow of a flickering streetlight, I looked back one last time. I could just barely make out 3 or 4 figures standing at the trail entrance. They didn't move. They didn't shout. They didn't announce themselves as police or neighbors. They just stood there in the rain, watching us. Whoever was in those woods that night hadn't stumbled upon us by accident. They had been waiting in the dark, watching us from the moment we stepped off the path. And to this day, I still wonder, if we hadn't started running when we did, what were they planning to do when they caught us? This happened about 3 years ago in September. My friend Agatha had just bought a new telescope, so we decided to drive up the southwestern base of Mount Hood to do some stargazing. We're both experienced wood swimming. Agatha has been a lifelong camper, and I'm a professional wilderness survival guide. We've seen it all. Bears, cougars, wolves, elk. I've even stumbled upon occult rituals and off-grid hermits in the deep woods. Point is, we don't spook easily. We know the forest. As we were driving up a Forest Service road toward a clearing, I spotted a tent about 60 feet off the road. It was strange. There was no vehicle nearby, which is rare for that area. Even stranger, it was a standard 2 to 3 season cabin tent, even though the temperature was dropping toward 36 degrees. I suggested to Agatha that we slow down to check it out. I was worried someone might have dumped it as trash. We slowed to about 5 miles per hour. I shined a light toward it briefly. It looked improperly assembled, lopsided, and the mesh door wasn't fully zipped. We kept going, planning to check it more thoroughly on our way back down. But a few minutes later, as the road narrowed on a steep incline, Agatha suddenly slammed on the brakes. "I don't think we should go any further," she said. There was a weird, unsettling tension in her voice. She pulled a U-turn and we headed back down toward our original spot. As we approached the place where the tent was, I handed Agatha my headlamp so she could shine it out the window. And that's when things got impossible. The tent seemed to have moved. It was 50 feet further down the road and much closer to the pavement than it had been minutes before. I tried to tell myself my memory was just failing me, but then Agatha shined the light directly at it. I froze. "What are we even looking at?" I whispered. Agatha replied, "Yeah, I think it's a tent. It's just upside down." But it was more than that. My brain couldn't process the image. It looked like a Picasso painting. Nothing was where it was supposed to be. The poles, the seams, the geometry. It was all disjointed and distorted, like the tent had been folded through a dimension it didn't belong in. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, but it only got worse. Agatha whispered, "Dude, I think I see bare legs sticking up in the air." I looked again. Through the mesh door, I saw two pale bare legs sticking straight up in a dead bug position, knees slightly bent. I blinked one more time, and in that millisecond, the legs were gone. The mesh door was now tightly closed. The tent itself continued to look like a nightmare of cubism, shifting its shape every time I looked away. I actually started to get a headache, just trying to make sense of the geometry. Agatha rolled up the window and said, "Let's just go. Someone's probably sleeping in it." We both knew how ridiculous that sounded, but it was the only rationalization we had to keep from panicking. We reached the clearing, but the wrongness followed us. As soon as we stepped out of the truck, Agatha fell flat on her face. She's an expert hiker. She can walk these woods in her sleep, but she just collapsed. A minute later, the same thing happened to me. We kept tripping over absolutely nothing, over and over again. It felt like the ground wasn't where it was supposed to be. Agatha started setting up the telescope while I lay down on a tarp. That's when I noticed a new anomaly. The air at ground level was about 20 degrees warmer than the air just a foot above it. It wasn't a breeze. It was a stagnant pocket of heat. Agatha, who is always freezing, refused a blanket. She seemed to be in a trance. The telescope was useless too. She'd lock onto Jupiter, but the moment she stood up, the planet would vanish from the eyepiece, as if the sky were constantly shifting. I looked up. The sky was perfectly clear, but it was split in two by an invisible line running east to west. The northern half was lighter, as if affected by light pollution, while the southern half was pitch black. The stars on either side of the line were twinkling at different rates. As we watched, the effect reversed. The north went dark and the south turned light. A sharp, jagged boundary in the middle of the cosmos. 20 minutes later, Agatha sat bolt upright. She saw a light in the woods, near where that Picasso tent had been. We thought it might be a hiker, but the light was too high off the ground. I was starting to drift off when I suddenly sat up, triggered by a primal instinct I can't explain. Moving through the tree canopy were 3 blue orbs. These weren't flashlight beams. They were spheres of soft neon blue light. They were flying through the upper branches in a perfect triangular formation, rotating around one another as they drifted toward us. In that moment, A wave of visceral, prehistoric dread hit us both. It wasn't a fear of a person. It was a biological flight response. The feeling of no longer being at the top of the food chain. We didn't pack. We didn't close the telescope case. We just threw everything into the bed of the truck and floored it. Agatha drove like a maniac down the mountain, and my hands went numb from the sheer adrenaline of the panic. We didn't speak until we hit the highway and saw the headlights of a normal car. To this day, I don't have answers. Was it a tent? Or was it something else that tried to look like a tent and failed? All I know is that night on Mount Hood, the fabric of reality tore open, and we were right in the middle of the rip. The Pacific Northwest is a beautiful place, but if you grew up there, you know the woods feel different. They're dense, old, and they seem to watch you. When I was a kid, my world was defined by the boundaries of our property, massive stretches of forest and tree farms. My friends and I were explorers. We'd spend entire days following deer paths and climbing Douglas firs, losing track of time in the shadows of the canopy. There was one place, though, where our curiosity stopped. We called it the Witch's House. It was a rotting skeletal structure sitting just beyond a massive wall of tangled blackberry brambles. The roof sagged like it was tired of standing, and the windows were just dark, hollow eyes. Even in the middle of a sunny afternoon, that house felt wrong. It didn't just look abandoned, it felt avoided. One day, we were scouting the edge of the woods and noticed a weathered treehouse near the property line. As we climbed up to check it out, I froze. I saw a flicker of movement, something shifting behind the back door of the witch's house. We didn't wait to see what it was. We just ran. A week later, we were back in the woods, further north on my family's land. We were high up in the branches of two separate trees, hidden by the needles and the height. It felt like our own private world, until the sound of snapping branches broke the silence. We stopped breathing. An old man stepped out from the thicket, coming directly from the direction of the abandoned house. He looked like he belonged to another era. A worn-down cowboy hat, a faded flannel, and jeans that had seen years of hard labor. He stopped right beneath us, tilted his head, and looked straight into the branches. "Hello, girls." My heart stopped. We were hidden. We were silent. There was no way he should have known we were there. My friend, braver than I ever was, managed a shaky hello back. The man didn't move closer. He just stood there, looking up with an expression I still can't quite place. "I want you two to be careful in these woods," he said, his voice gravelly but calm. "I've been around a long time, and I wouldn't want you both getting hurt." Then, as quickly as he appeared, he turned and walked back toward the witch's house, disappearing into the grey-green blur of the trees. We stayed in those trees for what felt like hours, petrified, waiting for a sound that never came. When we finally gathered the courage to bolt back home, we didn't stop until the door was locked behind us. For the next month, we became obsessed. We sat at the edge of our land with binoculars, staring at that rotting house for hours. We were looking for a light, a plume of smoke, a footprint, anything to prove a man was living there. But there was nothing. No movement, no life, just the wind through the rotted boards. To this day, I can't tell you who or what met us in those woods. Was he a squatter living in a house that should have collapsed decades ago? Or was he something that had stayed behind to watch over the forest? I don't know. But after that day, whenever the woods felt a little too quiet, or the shadows grew a little too long, we didn't push our luck. We turned back, because I always felt like he was still there, making sure we did. August in northern New Mexico has a specific kind of silence. The mesas stand against the stars like ancient dark towers, and the air is so still you can hear a sound from miles away. Back in 2013, a guy named John was throwing a massive rager on his family's ranch. His parents were gone, and the property was huge, acres of farmland, the San Juan River cutting through it, and a towering mesa overlooking the whole southern border. It was a festival atmosphere. DJs, hundreds of people, and the smell of dust and sagebrush mixed with bitter and smoke. But as the sun went down, a feeling of paranoia started to settle in. One of my friends kept insisting the cops were going to show up. We told him to relax, but he was right. The guy at the front gate had passed out drunk, leaving the property wide open. Around 10 p.m., the horizon lit up with red and blue strobes. Suddenly, the music was drowned out by sirens and the barking of K9 units. Hundreds of people scattered into the dark like headless chickens. My group bolted for the river. We scrambled through a barbed wire fence. I actually ripped my pants clean off on the wire and dove into a thicket of cottonwoods near the water. We sat there, hearts hammering, listening to the police radios crackling just 20 yards away. The beams of their flashlights were slicing through the leaves right above our heads. But then, the river behind us started to splash. At first, I thought it was another kid trying to swim for it. But the splashing was heavy, deep. Then came the panting, slow, rhythmic, and coming from something with massive lungs. My friend Sean whispered that he'd rather be arrested than eaten by whatever was in that water. We were saved by a stroke of luck. An acquaintance named Ryan had climbed the mesa earlier and shouted down, pretending to be a cop, telling the search teams the area was clear. The officers bought it and moved off. We thought we were safe. But the moment the cops left, the heavy panting in the river got closer. Branches began to snap. Something huge was emerging from the water. We didn't wait. We scrambled up the face of the mesa, tearing our hands open on rocks and cacti. When we reached the top, we looked back down at the chaos below. And that's when it happened. Something darted across the mesa right in front of us. It was a silhouette made of shadow, but it had the build of an elite linebacker. Massive shoulders and long, powerful arms. It ran on two legs with a speed that felt physically impossible. It made my biggest friend, a guy we called Tank, look like a child. It didn't make a sound. It just blurred past us and vanished into the open desert. Ryan whispered, "I think that was Bigfoot." No one laughed. The air felt heavy, like the desert itself was holding its breath. We tried to loop back to the trucks by heading north through a steep hill covered in sagebrush. It was dead quiet until we heard it. Laughter. high-pitched, childlike giggling coming from the top of the hill. We froze. Sean yelled out for whoever it was to show themselves, but the only response was more laughter. Softer this time, but closer. It felt like they were circling us in the dark. We shined our iPhone lights up the hill and saw nothing but shifting shadows. But I could swear I saw two small figures crouched behind the brush, watching us. We didn't say another word. We just ran. We eventually made it out, but the night ended with a tragedy that put all the monsters to shame. A close friend of the host had flipped his car while trying to escape the police raid. He didn't make it. I still think about that night whenever I'm near those mesas. I think about how fast a party can turn into a hunt, and how a night of fun can end in a permanent goodbye. The desert remembers those moments, and every time the wind whistles through the sagebrush, I can still hear those faint, echoing giggles. What do you think of these stories? If you've ever experienced anything like this, share it in the comments below.